Instructions for accessing subtitles in a language other than English are included on our board meetings webpage as well as in the description below. Instrucciones para acceder a los subtítulos en un idioma que no sea el inglés se incluyen en nuestra página web de reuniones de la Junta, así como en la descripción a continuación.
Thank you for coming this evening, everybody. So I'd like to call the meeting of the Budget Advisory Committee to order. And so the first item on the agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance. So if we could go ahead and stand and we apologize our flags up first. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So the next item is the approval of the agenda and the time allocations. And so this is just really what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep our meeting to an hour and 30 minutes in total because of the topic. It can be one of those things that we lose people pretty quickly in terms of being able to maintain attention. And so that's really the reason. And so if we could have a motion on the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion? Anybody can motion and anybody can second.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Mr. Pepper will move to approve.
I second it.
And Ms. Lepak, the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Pass. Okay. And so the next item on the agenda is public comment regarding items on or not on the agenda. And if we have any public comment, anybody who's a member does not need to issue a public comment. So you'll have an opportunity to speak. So it looks like we have no public comment. And so with the next item, we have the Budget Advisory Committee, just introductions of the committee members. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. Again, Chris Carson, I'm the Chief Business Official, and I have been with the district since 2020 as the Chief Business Official.
I'm Teresa Machado, Executive Assistant at the District Office and Confidential Representative.
I'm Meredith Woodward. I am the Student Services Staff Assistant at the District Office and a CSCA representative.
I'm Jen Calloward. I'm a Wade Thomas parent, day and night, and during day. I work for the Department of Public Health in San Francisco in the Environmental Health Branch.
I'm Daniel Cassidy. I'm a parent. I've got two daughters at Brookside, 4th grade and 1st grade. And my wife roped me into being on the school board trustee a couple years ago.
Yes.
I'm very grateful to her. I'm Rachel Litwack. I'm the school board president. I have two children. I have a 10th grader at Archie, and I have a daughter in White Hill.
I'm on Twig. I have two boys at Manor, TK, and a 1st grader. In my other life, I'm a scientist.
I'm Rachel Feibush. I'm a Wade Thomas parent. I have a kindergartner and a 2nd grader.
I'm Pete Santucci. I'm here as the Manor teacher representative, and I also have an 8th grader at White Hill. I also am going to mostly miss this meeting, but I promise to read the notes and listen to the recording.
I'm Mary Claire Mullen. I'm co-principal at White Hill Middle School along with John Baker, and I'm about to be a Wade Thomas TK parent.
I'm Amanda Wagner. I'm the principal at Brookside Elementary. Wait, do we want to go over here? To John or the parent next to you? Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry. I'm Christy Fish. I'm a Hidden Valley principal.
I'm PJ Pepper. I'm the parent of a kindergartner at Manor, and kid will start TK, I guess, in 2 years.
Julia Wolcott, Assistant Superintendent of Education Services and mom of 2 Ross Valley School District alumni.
Hi, my name is Monica Gray, and I'm a parent of a TK and a 1st grader at Hidden Valley, and I'm a small business owner.
My name is Newton Oldfather. I'm a Brookside parent. a second grader and a kindergartner who will start next year.
I'm Melissa Van. I'm a Brookside parent. I've got a daughter in second grade and a son in fifth grade.
I'm Julie Harris, principal at Wade Thomas, and I have 2 Ross Valley School District alum kiddos.
My name's Susan Artico. I'm a teacher also in the district at Wade Thomas, second grade, and I have 3 West Valley alumni that are moving on to college and also at Archie.
And my name is Janet Mercer, and I'm here as the Brookside Certificated Representative, and I'm a school social worker at Brookside and Manor, and I have 2 Ross Valley alums as well.
I'm Cindy Credo. I am the TK teacher at Hidden Valley School.
I'm Danielle Kestenbaum. I have 2 Hidden Valley kids, TK and third grade, and I'm also a public school teacher in TUHSD.
I'm Amber Johnson. I'm a parent of a first grader at Hidden Valley, and I work at the business office at the Branson School.
Hi, my name is Anna Marsh. I am a parent at Wade Thomas. I have a kindergartner and a second grader.
But she said, Jason Kennedy, kindergarten and second grader, Wade Thomas.
Peggy Cozy, principal at Manor School.
I'm Pam Cooney. I am the accountant at the district office. I am also a CSEA representative.
Lindsay Crawford. I'm in the business department at the district office, and I'm the CSEA president.
And Marcy Trahan, superintendent, not a member, formal member of the committee, but as the superintendent, I'm attending the meetings.
Well, thank you, everybody. In terms of our committee, we have a lot of work in front of us. And our biggest task will be taking a look at our budget in general, going through the budget, kind of getting a feel for how to look at the budget, how to interpret the budget, and then ultimately making recommendations to the governing board on ways that the committee feels that we can save budget dollars. And so what we'll be doing this evening is actually digging in a little bit. I know I've provided a lot of paper here. I apologize. What I wanted to do first is actually give us a copy of our general fund. And so this is really what we'll be looking at this evening initially. And so actually, which is a presentation discussion of topics related to the state budget. And so passing out the budget as well as a copy of the presentation. And I do want to point out that I'm sorry, I didn't have this turned off, which I should. We do have a copy of the presentation also attached to the agenda this evening. And so if you do have a computer, you can go ahead and follow along. If you don't, you can also get it this evening.
Does anybody need a writing utensil if you didn't bring one? Yep. Okay, we'll get some.
And so one of the things that we wanted to do is just talk about the purpose of the Budget Advisory Committee. And with the purpose of the Budget Advisory Committee, as you can see with our first slide, and we also have it within our actual agenda, is really to provide, to learn about the budget, the district's budget, and also to then provide recommendations to the governing board, as we mentioned earlier. And one of the key things that we do need to keep in mind is that there's something called the Local Control Accountability Plan that governs, it's more like our guiding light in terms of how we function as a district, how we build our budget, and what we're trying to accomplish. And what it surrounds is actions that are designed to impact student achievement. And so student achievement, first and foremost, related to unduplicated pupils, which an unduplicated pupil is an unduplicated pupil are students that are living in poverty, that are English language learners, or are fostering. And so that's the definition of an unduplicated pupil. And so we always have that guiding light with our local control accountability plan. And that plan is built with input from all of the stakeholders of the district. So it does involve parent involvement, and it involves our teachers union and our classified staff involvement. They have a voice in that one. Everybody does, and so that's our guiding light. And then in terms of our recommendations, we'll be making recommendations to the governing board, and then providing some form of a progress report to the governing board. Now, this next item, I just have it as a draft, only because one of the things that I would like to do this evening is just talk about this in terms of right, do it in two different places. What I'd like to do is have each of you take a look at what these meeting norms are, read them to yourself, and then if you could introduce yourself to one of your neighbors and talk about these norms, and if there's a norm that you think we should have that would be different on here. And so we'll go ahead and give you about 2 minutes to do that so that you can also introduce yourself to your neighbor.
I 100% agree with that. Oh my gosh, I'm working on this. Yes, I see. Yeah, I think not only recognize the difference between intent and activate, respect on that. Oh my gosh. I think they're distributed to 3 and we have to swap in budget, so I think that
We can come back together. We make sure it's all Okay, I apologize. I do have a quiet voice. Hopefully it's on or it's louder in the back. And so, in terms of our meeting norms, again, these were just a draft. And so, what I would like to do now is just really open it up to the floor. And if there was one that came out of your discussion with your partner that would be different or an addition to what we have up here. No? Yes.
We actually, these are great. The one that we discussed, Anna and I, was the fact that maybe we need to focus on making an impact and efficiency. so that we stay focused on our goal.
Impact and efficiency. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be taking notes up here as well, because I'm going to have some other questions as well. And ultimately, when we ask our questions, they'll help us to guide our next meeting. And so when we come back for our follow-up meeting in roughly 2 weeks, I think it is, actually 2 weeks, we'll go ahead and add that one to the meeting notes. And so seeing the others. So what we'll be doing this evening, and I do apologize, I'm probably going to talk a lot more than you want to hear, and I promise it won't happen as much as we move forward. But what we'll talk about this evening is timelines. As you'll recall, one of the things that we have to talk about according to the Budget Advisory Committee process is we have to talk about timelines. And so you'll see timelines this evening. We'll talk about understanding of the general fund, which is really going to be the main focus of what we talk about this evening, is just understanding how to be able to look at that general fund budget, which is the reason I gave it to you, and be able to break it apart and understand what it is we're looking at. And then we have the various aspects of the budget, the expenses, the revenues, the multi-year projections, and then what our next steps are. So in terms of timelines, this is probably a slide that if you've looked at any of my presentations, you've seen before. And the reason I bring it forward is because what it does is it really breaks down what it is we do in our business office on basically a 3-month rolling cycle. Every 3 months, in essence, we have a budget that is due, some form of a budget. And so where we're at right now, we're just waiting for our governor's May revision, which is due by 5/14. And we just completed our second interim budget, which would have been due by 3/15. You also have our adopted budget, which is due no later than July 1. The problem with that is we also have a process that we have to adhere to. Not only do we have to have our budget adopted, but we also have to have a hearing of the budget. And so when you look at the RVSD cycle, what we have is we have our June 26th is the board meeting that we would approve the budget. And the meeting before that is May 29th. With May 29th as our board meeting date for the initial adopted budget, it makes our work pretty difficult in terms of getting it into the budget. And when looking at some of the other timelines that we have, if we were to be attempting to make it cuts within salaries and benefits, we have other statutory deadlines. And so those statutory deadlines are March 15th and May 14th. So once you miss the March 15th date, the May 14th date really doesn't matter because you can't meet those statutory deadlines. And so in essence, what I'm really saying is that the work that we're doing right now will not directly impact the adopted budget. But keep in mind that we have all of those other budgets that we have to provide. And so those would help to inform more likely our first interim budget and then our process for the following adopted budget with these dates in mind as well, March 15th. So the really key dates. And when looking at other districts around, it's pretty common to have these types of committees meet on a quarterly basis, basically as you're finishing up your process for those interim reports. So once we get through this process, we'll probably start to have these more routinely as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Are there any questions on that? Again, these are statutory deadlines. Now, this is where I actually enjoy talking about the general fund budget the most. I'm an accounting nerd, I'm sorry. So this is where you start to see me get excited. I think of the general fund kind of like a teeter-totter. And so you need to think about it in terms of the unrestricted and the restricted side of the budget. What you're really looking at is two different distinct budgets, and they're important to note. And so if you could pull up your general fund budget, this will make a lot more sense. And so this is actually our second interim budget that we've given you here. And so as you look at that document, if you can see where the number 1 is on our slide, what you'll note up at the top on the right corner, what you'll see is it'll say Form 01 in the middle. And what that means is Form 1 is our general fund. So you know that you're looking at our general fund. That's important to note because when you look at our budget and it's attached, our entire second interim budget document is attached to our agenda, there's lots of forms that look very similar. So this is our general fund. You can also see at the top in number 2, it does also state general fund. But right below that, it states unrestricted. So what you're looking at on page 1 is simply your unrestricted general fund budget. It's one of those two sides of the teeter-totter. And as you look, what you note on number 3, it talks about the various sections, and what you're looking at is, it looks very similar to what an accountant would call an income statement. So you see like a revenues, your expenses, and then you end up with a net gain or loss. So section A is your revenue, section B are your expenditures. You do have an excess, which is C, but then there are other financing sources and uses. And other financing sources and uses are things like transfers to other funds or transfers to the restricted side of contributions to the restricted side of the general fund. And so that's what those are there. And then you see the net increase, decrease in fund balance. So that's probably pretty straightforward, but the important thing to note is this is our unrestricted side. Then you start to look at our fund balance, which is section F. And then as you change to page 2, page 2 just continues that. One thing that I was remiss in talking about on page 1, I apologize, I didn't get it back. Page 1, if you look at number 4, how it goes across, what you'll see is the descriptions: original budget, board approved budget, actuals to date, projected year totals, and then differences. So what do those mean? Original budget is our adopted budget in June. So what you're looking at there was our budget that was adopted in June of 2023. Board approved operating budget, that one will actually change because we're looking at our second interim budget right here. So our board approved operating budget for our second interim is actually our first interim budget, which was our December budget. So that's what that column is. And the actuals to date, those are, since this is our second interim budget shows our actual expenditures or revenues as of January 31st. So as we're looking at it, you can see your January 31st expenditures, your previous adopted budget in first interim, you can see your adopted budget. And then finally you get to column D, which is your projected, which would be our actual second interim budget. And so, for example, when you look at item B1, certificated salaries, you see $6,147,502 is our original budget. Then we show $6,055,505 as a projected. And so there is a change in our budget during the period. So it gives you an idea of what those numbers are for each of our budget cycles. So then going back to page 2, when you look at section 3 at the top, that's just a continuation of your fund balance. So it starts with your beginning fund balance, then it takes into consideration your gain or loss, and then you end up with your ending fund balance. So that fund balance on the unrestricted is the number, whenever we talk about our fund balance, that's the number we're referring to. That particular number. The one that's on the unrestricted side.
Is that the one under unassigned, unappropriated amount? What number are you referring to?
It's actually, when you look at it, it's actually page 1, number 2. There's a portion that is unassigned, and there's also a 3%. You have ending balances, unspendable, and you have 3% reserve for economic uncertainty. So when you look there, you start with page 1, and you have your beginning balance
In section F.
in section F, which is number 1. Then you have number 2, which is your ending balance. So it's the 7,339,000 plus the loss of basically 700,000 gives you a total of 6,639,000. Then you have portions that are non-spendable, which are revolving cash. That's the only non-spendable one we have, which is $3,000. What that is if we have for example, a paycheck that is missed, that type of thing, we have a small amount that we can issue an emergency check for. The problem is that in education in California, it sounds funny, but the district actually doesn't control the money. It's actually at the County Office of Education. They issue all of our checks, whether they're for payroll or for accounts payable. And then the accounts are actually held not by the County Office of Education, they're actually held by the county. So everything kind of rolls up to the county. And it would be something similar when looking at, for example, the towns of San Anselmo, Fairfax, et cetera. They probably roll up to the county as well. And every school district in the county rolls up to first the Marin County Office of Education and then ultimately to the county of Marin. And when looking at item, looks like E, on page 2, you see reserve for economic uncertainty. When you see that, that is the statutorily required 3% minimum reserve. And so that of the ending fund balance that you got in number 2, that 3% is item E. And then the remaining is unassigned. Does that make sense? Then once you go below into number 5, and it's that way as you move forward in pages, what it does is it looks at, on page 1, everything was summarized. Beginning on 5, everything is detailed. So 5 is our LCFF sources. So if you go back to number 1, you see LCFF sources are A1. So it's all the detail for A1. And as you move forward, you can get to that granular level of detail within our budget for each one of those. So you see 19,293,000 at the bottom for subtotal LCFF sources at the bottom of section 5. Then you move into federal revenues, all of our federal revenues. On the unrestricted side, it's 0. Normally, federal revenues are categorical funds. You have other state revenues, which you can get the detail of. And then you move into other local revenues. And then once you're done with your revenues, then you move into your expenses. And so as you're looking at your expenses, if you turn to page 5, you see all of our certificated salaries. And certificated salaries start with certificated teacher salaries, so those would be like a classroom teacher. You have certificated pupil support salaries. Those are positions like counselors and psychologists and speech therapists, things of that nature. Then we get into certificated supervisors and administrators. Those are people like your principals, the superintendent. And then you end up with other certificated salaries. Then we move into classified salaries. You see the detail there. And first you have classified instructional salaries. So what those are the instructional aid salaries. And we have classified support salaries. Classified support is one of those catch-all type positions, and really it gets into positions like our custodians and our grounds staff or maintenance staff. Those are primarily the staff that are there. Then you have classified supervisors and administrators. We only have 3 of us, and that would be somebody like me would be in there. And then we have classified clerical, technical, and office. So that would be all of our office staff at the school sites, as well as at the district office, the clerical staff. And then we have our other classified salaries. And other classified salaries, what those are, I know it's, when you look at it, it seems like a lot of money, $200,000, but primarily what you see there are things such as our noon supervisors. So the staff that are out watching the children during the breaks, during the recess periods. Those are the primary people that fall under there. And then we get into our employee benefits. And so really, as you break down, you see the detail of all of our statutory benefits of our health and welfare, without going into the detail on the health and welfare and all of that. You move on to page 6, and you end up with all of our supply benefits. And things that go under the 4100 would be actual textbooks. So you'll see that we don't have a lot there under the textbook section. We also have books and reference materials, 4200. Those are other instructional materials. Might be workbooks, those types of things. Materials and supplies are really, it's a catch-all for anything. It could be something as simple as toilet paper, but it also means things like copy paper, classroom pencils, scissors, all of the classroom supplies, those types of things. And then we get into non-capitalized equipment. Non-capitalized equipment are things that are $500 or less. And you see things in there such as, $5,000 or less, but above 500. So it could be something like a computer or a group of Chromebooks that we might purchase. And so that's what you see under our supply budgets. When looking at services and other, and this is our big category of the unrestricted side, that's not salary and benefits. And you see things in here such as travel and conferences. Again, these are only the unrestricted side. You have dues and memberships, or insurance, operations and housekeeping. Our operations and housekeeping is things such as our utilities fall under that category. Just because it's a big dollar amount, I wanted to make sure to point that out. And when we're talking our insurance that you see under the 5400, that's not our health and welfare, that's our property and liability insurance. So that would be those types of services. And I know it's a lot of detail, but I wanted to make sure to kind of explain all of that. Then you also see professional consulting, and professional consulting is things, it does include things like legal services, it includes any contracts we might have, it might include blanking out on everything that goes in there. But I do know that I have a slide that will kind of break down everything a little bit further later on as we go. And so then you look under capital outlay and you see that we don't have any capital outlay. Things that would go under capital outlay would be anything over $5,000 that we would be paying for out of the unrestricted general fund. So if we were going to build, let's say we were going to build something here and pay for it out of the general fund, and it was going to cost $15,000, you would put it under capital outlay. And as you flip through to page 7, we get into our other expenses, which are things such as indirect costs. And indirect costs can be, oftentimes you see negative numbers, and what that is it's transferring some of the general fund expenses into the programs on the restricted side. And so that's what you see in there, those types of things. As you move forward, you have interfund transfers out. We have $102,000, 102, 126. Does everybody see that? That goes into another fund. That goes directly into our Child Nutritional Services Fund. And the reason it goes into our Child Nutritional Services Fund is because the cost of our food program is actually greater than the revenue that we bring in. And so that's something that hits us every year. And then as we flip our page, you see one other really large dollar amount, which is contributions from unrestricted revenues. And this is one of those things that you don't hear the district talk a lot about, and there's a reason for it. One of the things that we have to do is we have to transfer 3% of our general fund into routine restricted maintenance account. It's a categorical program, and that 3% does things like pays for the general maintenance of the facilities. And so with roughly $900,000, that's one portion of that. And that's a requirement under the state if we've ever received any modernization dollars. And so we've used modernization funds many different times. But then the other thing, which is why districts don't talk about it a lot, is the other portion of that is a contribution towards special education. And that's because special education is considered categorical funds. And when you talk about the program, it doesn't fund itself. So we get additional dollars for special education, but the cost of the program greatly exceed it. And we don't like to talk about it because the special education children are our neediest children, and it can often be seen as one of those areas that trying to take dollars from the neediest children. And so that's the reason that you don't hear me talking about it a lot. But it is a program cost and does impact negatively the general fund. The other part of that is there's something called a special ed maintenance of effort, which I don't talk a great deal about. But the reason that there's a special ed maintenance of effort is that because it does negatively impact not just Ross Valley, this is every district in the state and in the nation. What the federal government does and the state, they require you to spend the same dollars per child and in total on special education. So I couldn't go into special education and say, you know what, this is too much money, I'm gonna cut $1 million and cut the program, because it does impact the neediest children. And so what you have is, it's a total dollar amount. So you get from one year to the next, you have to spend the same dollar amount. And if you cut the expense, then it gets down to starting to look at your, what's called a case miss, which is your measure of your special ed students in each year. And it looks at the cost per child. It gets down to the child level. And so you have to spend the same per child or more from one year to the next. And then if you fail that, then you have to have valid reasons. And it gets down to the program side. So do you have a high cost child that is no longer in the program? Maybe they've promoted up to the high school level. And so you can start to reduce your special ed maintenance of effort that way. But it's not one of those programs that I can just go in and say, I want to cut. And so again, that's one of the reasons you don't hear me talking about it, even though it is a pretty big hit to the district. Now, I've talked a lot. Is there anybody who has a question about what I've gone through?
I just wanted to clarify your last statement. So if you were to reduce the cost of special education, meaning that perhaps a student matriculates out of a high cost program into a lower cost program or general ed, the district just needs to provide evidence of that. It's not that we are expected to keep the same financial obligation each year. As long as we provide evidence, then that's acceptable.
And I would have to go down and pull invoices, because this is a process that actually goes back to, we have what's called a SELPA that oversees the entire special ed program at the county level. And we have to report our information to the SELPA, and so they'll actually ask us for the documentation.
And special education local plan area is what SELPA is.
Thank you, and I'm sorry,
That's okay.
my mouth was going on. And so, yes, we would have to go down to the specific student and provide invoices and document the exact dollar amount. It gets that granular.
Okay, thank you.
But could you comment as to what percentage of this almost 6 million is the special ed?
Well,
Well, no.
I can break it down for you, but it's going to be almost all of it. I mean, you have the 900, you have roughly 900,000 that is the routine restricted maintenance account, but then the bulk of the rest is.
So are you saying that if a special ed student graduates 5th grade, no longer requires the same services in middle school as they did in elementary school, that the expectation is you still have to pay the same amount for them because you don't want to go to the nitty-gritty for the student to show the evidence, so it's less money? I guess that's what I'm confused by.
No, we would actually only show it if we did not meet the total cost. So
it's a total cost.
You start with the total cost, and if our expenses are the same from one year to the next or more, then we don't need to do anything. Our maintenance of effort has actually increased. And so next year when we go, that becomes our new basis. So we would have to then spend that dollar amount. And the only time you would get down to the granular level is if you decrease your expenses. And so oftentimes, I mean, if you think about it, the bulk of our expenses are with people. And so we have automatic pay increases with step in column because of the salary schedules. And so generally, you're going to be spending a little bit more each year anyways for that reason. And so it generally doesn't become an issue, but if you were to go in and say, we're going to cut $200,000 out of our budget and we haven't increased our other expenses $200,000 in special ed, that would be problematic. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just confused. It sounded like it was just easier to keep paying this rather than go into.
No, we would actually reduce the expenses. So if the child does require less services, it would reduce our total expenses. We're not automatically paying the same amount.
Okay, can I just ask for one more clarification?
Yeah.
So out of $20 million roughly, it sounds like about 5 million is a special ed. Am I getting this right?
Yes. Of the contribution, because there's actually more expenses that fall in the restricted side of the budget.
Right, so from this 20 million of unrestricted, 5 million is special.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, how do we know what percentage of the district's special education program is paid for from the unrestricted fund versus restricted fund?
We can get the exact percentage, but it's going to be the bulk of it is paid out of the unrestricted side. I can actually give the dollar amount at the next meeting. I just don't have it with me. We'll make sure we document that and get it. Yes.
When you say that 5 million goes into the special education fund, maybe you're going to talk about this later, but does that go to the salaries for special education teachers?
A portion of it, correct.
A portion of it.
Because what you do is when talking about our restricted programs, we talk about different programs specifically. So we have special education. We might have a federal IDEA, which is also special education. We might have, we have art and music block grant, which is a one-time dollar, which is something entirely different. And within the restricted side of the budget, we actually account for each of those funds almost like its own entity within the categorical side of the budget. So we have within the restricted budget, we have budgets on each one of those as well. And so what we do is we would code off all of our salaries for the certificated staff for the special education. They would be charged to the special ed program. And then at the end of the year, as we're doing the settle up, we would have to make sure that our revenues and our expenses tie out.
Good.
And so what ends up happening is you do what's called a contribution. So it looks like a revenue on the restricted side. It looks like a negative revenue. It's basically a contra revenue out of the unrestricted side. So you'll see the negative amount on the unrestricted, the positive on the restricted side. And then again, as you look at all the way down with your special education, the revenues and expenses zero out.
Then you actually track your time, like the administrative staff tracks their time, how much they spend on the special education program, or this is just a metric made up about, we're just going to budget this much of admin?
No, we actually code off all of our teachers that are special ed teachers to special ed, and then we have different other staff that work with them as well. For example, we have psychologists and speech and occupational therapists and different things that get charged also to special education. So it's only for the students that require the services in special education, those dollars will be charged there. Yes?
Can I ask, does this include like litigation settlement as well? Is that included in this number, or is this just programming and staff and assessments and things like that?
So we also have that's part of the 5,800, if you look, which I'll get to in a minute. When we go, I have another slide and it'll break down that the total 5,000 objects. And one of the things that's on there is special education, and that is that fee. But then as part of those settlements, we also have services that we're providing to children. And so those services are still being charged to the special ed. So.
And not all settlements are part of lawsuits. Settlement agreements for special education students. Not all of these special education settlements are due to lawsuits. It's when you're looking at how to provide what's called FAPE or free appropriate public education, and it's what the IEP team determines that the child needs through the IEP process. So sometimes there are certain situations for certain children that they need something beyond what we offer in our current programs in our schools, just based on the child's individual needs.
Yes.
Where does the Yes Foundation fall in this?
The Yes Foundation actually is a categorical program.
Or restricted.
Restricted. So it's it's not in this particular side of the budget. So again, think of it kind of like a teeter-totter. It's on the other side.
And when Deer Park sale funds come in, will that also be restricted? Because I believe that can only be used for buildings or CapEx.
That's correct. It would have to go into a capital facility fund. Okay. And with that, again, this is just to summarize what the general fund looks like. Page 1, you have the summary level data by major object, and then as you move on, it's your detailed information. So you kind of think of it like a pyramid. And I didn't want to go through as detailed on the restricted side because it gives you an opportunity to look at the budget as well later on. But it looks exactly the same, but it starts on page 9. And how you can see that is you'll see it says restricted at the top. So when talking, you might hear somebody like me, I'll use the term restricted, categorical, I use them interchangeably, and I apologize. They're really the same thing. And so if I talk about a categorical program, what it means is it sits in the restricted general fund. And so programs that are in the restricted general fund are things such as YES program. We have Title I, which is federal, Title II, Title III. We also have all of our COVID funds, which are coming to an end. And we have art, music, instructional materials block grant, which is one time, things of that nature. And so it looks exactly the same. So without going into all the detail, it just exactly the same as page 1 and 2, and then as you move forward. But again, it's related to all of those projects. And again, it's the summary with the detail. Yes?
Just really fast, it looks like we're going on page 6, where it says professional consulting services at almost $1 million. Is it possible for this committee to get a list of what those services are and what they each cost?
I have some of that already broken out, and we'll get to that.
Okay, thank you.
So then we talk about the sides of the teeter-totter. You have the restricted and the unrestricted. Beginning on page 17, all it does is put them together. And so when we talk about page 17 and 18 on, all it is our total general fund. And so one of the things that is important to note when looking at this, I mentioned that our ending fund balance within the unrestricted side is the number that we talk about our reserve. When we talk about the reserve percentage, it's based upon our total expenses and other transfers out, other financing sources on the total general fund. And so it becomes a percentage of also your categorical side. So that's just a thing to note. They look at the entire general fund. And again, page 18 is just starting where it gives you the detail of the entire general fund. In summary, with all the detail. And now I've talked a whole bunch, and so I'm going to give you guys an opportunity. So what is one question you have after spending the past few minutes looking at the budget? And so if you could turn to a neighbor and talk about it, I'll give you guys 2 minutes to talk about something, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, if I could bring us back together, I do want to try and get us out on time. I know there's some really good conversations going on.
Oh, I guess the best way to do it is look at
The total, right?
So if I could bring us back together, I do want to point one thing out as well, which I did not do. Give me 1 second, I'll tell you the exact page to look at. If you look at page 12, in the middle of the page, you'll see object 8621 that says parcel taxes, and it's 4,623,000. That's our parcel tax revenue, and that's also on the categorical side. And so we only pay for teacher salaries and benefits out of that. The only thing that I have to transfer out that the parcel tax will not pay for is the pension costs. So the STRS pension costs would have to be transferred over into the unrestricted side. I just wanted to point that out. Do we have anybody who'd like to offer up a part of what you were talking about? The reason I'm asking the questions is this will help us to inform the next meeting.
Yeah, so what we were talking about is of all of this, what can we actually change? Like there's a lot of this that I think we can't touch. So what is it like to maximize our efficiency? Let's take it there.
I love it. And I have a slide on it. I promise you. And it's gonna be tonight. Yes.
Since you said that the Yes Foundations are on the the restricted side,
Yes.
what is the other local revenue under the restricted?
The bulk of the other local revenue, when you look at the 8699, is going to be the Yes Foundation, the bulk of that. So that would be on page 13. So when you look, the bulk of that 740,000 is going to be the Yes Foundation.
Okay, so that's the Yes. So what is this other local revenue under the unrestricted, number A4, the 323,000?
So that is things like interest income. So any income that we would have on the cash that we have in the county treasury.
Okay, that's interesting. And then my other question was, how often do we shop out our workers' compensation insurance and health insurance? I mean, is there any sort of annual or biannual, I don't know where we get our workers' compensation or our insurance or our legal, like how often do we look for more competitive providers?
So because of the size of the district, we generally go through the county Office of Education and the Joint Powers Authority that we have. And so I will say that our workers' comp rates are very competitive. And we have a really low, what would be called an ex-mod rate, which means it's not utilized a great deal. And so in relation to the rest of the county, we're actually really low. And in terms of our health benefits we get through CalPERS, which is the Public Employee Retirement System. And they're a really large entity in the state for health and welfare benefits. And so what it does is it helps to spread out that risk. And one of the things that had happened is that because of the size of the county and not a huge number of covered lives, what was happening is some of those costs with some of the other vendors were going up pretty exponentially much higher. And so that was part of what had happened. It's been many years. Again, I've been with the district for 4 years and we haven't looked at it, but it's something we could certainly take a look at, but more, it probably will not save us money, but I can certainly look at that.
Okay. Thank you. Quick question. In the certificated salaries, does that include contract employees or is there a separate line item for contract employees?
That's part of what ends up under the 5800s. We do have contract staff for things such as some of our special ed staff, like psychologists, or actually speech pathologists primarily. But those again are going to be under like the special ed side, so those would be restricted. Yes.
What is under the fund balance reserves, under 3, the unassigned unappropriated amount of 5.7, 5.5?
So you're looking at page 3?
Page 2.
Oh, page 2, okay. So what that is that's the difference. So if you look at page 1, you see number 2, the ending fund balance. You see, and I'm just gonna look at the original budget. You see $6,639,000. Then you go down, you subtract out the 3,000, which is the unassigned, or I'm sorry,
Right, but what makes up that amount?
I'm explaining what it is. It's in the end, you subtract out your 3%, the 896,000, and then you get to that number. And what that is in essence, it's what's left over. Think of it like a bank account.
Available funds then?
It's available funds.
So is there a long-term financial model that the district uses?
What I will talk about is what our ending balances are in comparison to like the state averages. And I will talk about that.
So Chris, is this also the reserve what we've been hearing about for? Yes. So this is that high reserve.
This is exactly what the reserve is. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. One more question on here. What are some areas within the general fund that you believe RVSD can cut costs? And this is a loaded question, and I know you had talked, where can I cut? But what are some things you've had a chance to look at it? Go ahead and talk to your neighbor for about 2 minutes.
I'm just scared. We can ask him that. Oh, because it's unrestricted and unrestricted.
It's not just by people, because there's that on page 6.
Okay, if I could bring us back. I do want to try and get us out on time. So now that you've had an opportunity to talk, just a little bit about some of what you're looking at. I know that it wasn't a lot of time. And we haven't gotten to the other parts, like exactly where can we cut, Chris? I know that's a good question. What are some of your thoughts? Does anybody want to offer something up?
I would love to know if there's a way not to spend $1 million in legal services every year. That seems like a large number.
Okay. I will say we don't spend $1 million, but we'll show that in just a minute.
Oh, okay. It was almost
Yeah.
Just coming back to the question I asked earlier, I don't see this, I haven't found the specifics of these professional consulting services that are budgeted for almost $1 million. I was looking.
We'll get
Right.
as
Well,
soon
that
as
seems
we
like
get
a
to the
place-
expenses, I've got a slide, 2 slides.
Well,
I'll show.
things that could be cut. If it's what I think it is from my district, I don't know if spending $1 million is worth what in-house PD can be developed in this community. So, place to look.
And see, part of the reason that I'm asking these questions is because it can also inform our discussions as we move forward.
Yeah.
So thank you.
This is not a lot of money, but some of the discussions certificated staff were having at Manor were around, for instance, workshops and conferences and that sort of thing, and how much of that is needed, because some of it is definitely, but is there some that we can cut or save money somewhere there?
Okay.
Travel and conferences.
Yes.
The daily substitutes that we started hiring with COVID.
Okay.
So they're still, I believe,
Yes. Yeah.
in the budget.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Anybody else? Okay.
I'd like to know about the just utilities and the expenses on that. It's not a huge amount. I mean, it's a little over 600,000, but I'm just curious what we're spending on that and if there's any ways to change up our systems. It might be a more long-term plan in terms of renewables and spending less on utilities. But I don't know what we're spending right now.
Yeah. We can break down the different areas of that as well. So, okay. So with that, I'm going to move us on. And this kind of gets into the meat of starting the meat of where is it that we can
We should do a time check at 6:40. What time are we expected to be out of here?
7.
Okay.
And we will be out by 7. As we look at our unrestricted and restricted, know that unrestricted may be used for any purpose. And when looking at restricted, it's also known as the categorical side. These funds are restricted by the grantor of the funds. And so that makes it really difficult for us to be able to go in and cut on the restricted side. And so going back to your specific question, Ms. Marsh, it's actually the unrestricted side is really where we're going to be focusing, because the restricted is getting into those categorical programs. And when looking at our specific categorical programs, and this isn't all inclusive, but these are the big ones. We have Title I, Title II, Title III, those are all federal funds. We have IDEA, which is a special education, but that's a specific federal special education. We also have state special education. We have routine restricted maintenance, which is that 3% that I talked about that we have to set aside. Then you have the YES Foundation, and we have our parcel taxes. So that's really, and in particular, the YES Foundation and the parcel taxes and the routine maintenance. Those are your big 3. Those are what drives the bulk of those expenses. Go ahead.
Do I read this as a projected 740 loss on the restricted fund this year? Restricted funds? On page 9, sorry.
Yeah. The answer is probably yes. Yes.
So when you say like no cuts, like we're not one-to-one matching, right?
Correct.
So what's that variance source?
So when you look at it, oftentimes what happens is they give you the entire amount, the entire allocation at once. And so you might record the entire amount and then you're spending it down throughout the period. And so it's not unusual for you to have a loss under the categorical side.
Even for projecting your total.
Even for projecting your total. Under the categorical side. So that does happen quite often.
What's the true up on that? and when?
It always is trued up at the end of the fiscal year. You end up going through and making sure everything balances out, but we don't spend outside of like your special education. We don't spend more than the dollars we receive. We stop once the program ends, so too does the expenditures in that area.
So does the expense sort of move back to the unrestricted side?
Or cut completely. Oftentimes with their targeted dollars, let me give you an example. Previously we had a large 2P grant, which is a tobacco use prevention grant. And so we would offer programs, cessation programs at the middle school level. And once those dollars were gone, we still have a little bit of 2P, but it's not the larger amount. And so the larger services that we were offering, cessation and tutoring and things of that nature, ended. And so that's the type of thing that would happen. Yes, Mr. Veterans.
Yeah, just on the point of looking only at the unrestricted versus restricted fund, considering the restricted fund side of the budget's roughly half the total expenses. I understand that these are all costs that have to be incurred, but wouldn't it also be appropriate to look at how that money is spent to see if it could be spent more cost efficiently? So you offer the same amount of programs, spending less.
We can certainly start offering some of that information up as well. And we're documenting everything as well, so we'll come back. I thought I saw another hand, no? Okay. And then as we look in our revenues, what you notice, and this is our total general fund, so it's restricted and unrestricted. You'll notice that the bulk of the dollars that we have or receive are local control funding formula. You see it listed as LCFF and parcel tax. And so one of the things that we are working on for the local control funding formula is looking at ways to increase our revenues there. And so you'll hear us talking about attendance and really driving home the point that one, children should be at school because it's hard to be to receive the education when you're at home, but two, it also does mean additional revenues for the district. And then in terms of the parcel tax, we do have a small group of us that are working to take a look at a survey, to survey the community to see if there is a appetite for increasing our parcel tax. And so we're working on that really as we speak. And so I want to point out that those are the two largest sources of revenues. This is just kind of going back to the point in terms of the local control funding formula, that there's many factors that are built into the local control funding formula, things such as cost of living adjustments, or change in attendance, and also with our district moving into property tax based for 1 year with community funded status. That also impacts these dollar amounts. So I just want to point that out. Yes, Mr. Pepper.
Does any of the information from the governor's May revision get incorporated in the adopted budget?
I will try and incorporate as much as possible if it will impact us in terms of revenues in particular. This is just the things that impact us in terms of our state aid funded versus community aid funded. Why you might be in community aid funded status and then drop out the following year. The one thing I do want to point out, and Mr. Pfeffer has pointed this out to me as well, our property taxes do change, and the number that we have here was what we had for second interim, and I know for certain that that number has changed, and we'll true that up also for our adopted budget when that comes out. So that would impact slightly our local control funding formula revenues. In particular, because we're going to be community funded for 1 year. In terms of our expenses, so what we had, and I apologize, this one is summarized and the other one's the next one. I'm sorry, this one is not summarized, it's more detailed than the other one, it's a little more summarized. This is our total general fund expenses, which also includes our categorical funds. So you do see that we have $7 million in categorical special education costs. And then we have roughly $5 million. It's really the 4.6 million for our parcel tax, which is teacher salaries and benefits. And then the remaining categorical expenses. Again, those are things that are difficult to cut. And so what we're really going to be focusing the most on, and we will bring back additional information on the categorical side, but we'll be focusing more attention on the unrestricted side. And as we look, this is the entire general fund unrestricted. And so as we look at the services and other, so we've got the 2.19 million, that's that 5,000 object. So it gets into like the 5,800s. And I should probably look so I can actually see what it is. Some of the things that go into the 5,800 are things such as our audit fees. And that, what you see here is a little bit higher than our normal audit fees. We had to have a supplemental audit this year related to some facilities, and we'll have it again this year. But then once that's gone, our audit fees will be reduced from that. We also have things such as we had advertising, which was additional things that we were looking at doing to try and increase in attendance. You see our legal fees, these are in thousands, so that's 130,000. Some other things that go into that are our LCAP goals. And so some of those goals that happen to be within the LCAP, the expenses break out into the 5,000 objects. So you see that there as well. We do have some student software and IT network costs that get built into that. What's important to note, and I know that one of the things that parents really focus on is what we call keyboard time or screen time. We try and reduce the amount of time our kids are on the computer. One of the problems that all districts have is balancing that with also the requirement that we have, which is testing. All of our testing for the state has to be done on the computer. So we are constantly having to update our equipment for the students there. And so we use Google Chromebooks, and so that's part of what's in there as well. And special education related costs, that goes back to that question that was asked earlier. I think it was over here. I think you asked that question. And so that you see that built in right there. And our utility costs, which are water, gas, electricity, phone. And we also have property and liability insurance. So, yes.
Where is the professional consulting services and operating expenditures of $1 million in this chart?
A portion of it is the 130 legal fees. A portion of it is the LCAP goals. You have audit fees. You have advertising, special education related costs, the 367.
Oh, so everything in the gray square on the far right makes up that.
Well, it's not the entire one. Everything that's off to the box is the 2.19 million. So within the 2.19 includes that 1 million.
Okay.
So everything would be in that box. And we can break it down even more granular. So, and I've heard that people want it a little more granular than that. We can certainly do that. Yes.
What does LCAP stand for?
Local Control Accountability Plan. And anytime you guys have that question, I have a tendency to shorten things with our acronyms, and education is really bad with acronyms, so I apologize. I try to say it, but I don't always. So with that, move on. Multi-year projections. I know we've only got a couple minutes. Multi-year projections, one of the things that's really difficult to understand with school districts is we have to do a multi-year projection. And we're looking at the current year plus the additional 2 fiscal years. So that's the 3-year multi-year projection. The reason we do that is because of AB 1200 and AB 2756. The reason that happened is that districts like the Richmond Unified School District, which is now the West Contra Costa Unified School District, they spent too much money, ended up going to the state for emergency loan. And so they came in and we have to do this whole process. We have to look at our multi-year projections, we have to look at salary settlements, et cetera. And so that's part of our process. And this particular slide is from School Services of California. And the reason I put it out there is because the other thing that's important to note is they're not forecasts. They're information with the best information that we have. And so it's something that's required to be put together. We look at all of the various factors that were given by school services, by the state, and build our budget. And they do change, and the factors will change every time. Pretty much every 3 months, those factors will be updated, and so those things do change. So I just wanted to point that out. Another thing that's important to note is that we have a 3% required reserve, and so this is a reserve standard from the state of California, and we fall within the 1,000 to 30,000 ADA, obviously, and so we have to have at a minimum a required 3%. The other thing that's important to note is you might hear out in the public that there is a reserve cap requirement, and which means that you can't go above a certain amount. And that's when the state has set aside so much into what they consider their emergency reserve fund for schools. It does not impact the Ross Valley School District. The reason is, and I put this language in here intentionally so people can see it, it's in the top bullet down at the bottom, and it's because our average daily attendance is below the 2501. And so it doesn't limit our reserve, but we do have to abide by the other parts of it. We have to include additional information with our budgets, how those dollars are set aside. Yes?
So is that the 896,000?
That's the required 3%, yes. And then anything above that would be down just below that. We do also have a board policy, and our policy is policy number 3100, and our board policy is 10% total reserve, and which means that the state 3% requirement plus an additional 7%. And so I do have additional information on that in just a second. This was from our second interim budget. This was our multi-year projection. I do want to point out that our net increase decrease, again, this is unrestricted only. We do show a structural deficit, and right below it, you see the unrestricted reserve percentages across our multi-year projections. The other thing that is really, really important to note is that we were at 25.71% in 23-24. So we're estimating to decrease our reserve. And with the recent salary increase with the tentative agreement that was just approved by the RVTA, the Ross Valley Teachers Association, as well as the governing board, these are what our reserves look like. And so we do show just under the 10% in that third year with just the teacher's salary agreement. And I think maybe we will pass on this one just because in the interest of time. But this is probably something that we come back to real fast at our next meeting. And the question was just, what percentage do you think is prudent for us to maintain? 3, 5, 10%. Keep in mind that we have a requirement of 3%, and we have the governing board.
Could you say again, the reserve that we have, how many months of operating expenses does the 10% reserve account for? Roughly?
And generally, you would have roughly 17% would be 3 months worth of payroll. And so anything below that, it starts to reduce the number of months. And so 10% is, it's a little over half of that. So let's just say a year and a half or a month and a half worth of payroll. And one of the things that is potentially on the horizon is what they call state deferrals. That's one of the things that the state has done in the past is they say that they're going to give you their state aid on a set schedule. And then what they do is they realize that they can't afford it. And so they'll say, we're not going to give it to you in January, but we'll give it to you in August. And so across those fiscal years, it becomes a cash flow issue, which gets back to that whole issue. But that's something that could happen to us, and we'll know a little bit more with our May revise, hopefully. I do want to point one thing out, because we talk about our large reserves. One thing that has happened over the last several years, we first had lots and lots of COVID-19 funding. And first of all, this is also School Services of California, which is the third party that most districts get their financial information from. And that's our go-to. So we had all of the COVID-19 funding that we received, which was all one-time dollars. Then the other thing that happened is across the state, most districts were in declining enrollment. And what would normally have happened is you would have the declining enrollment in the current year. You wouldn't feel the effect of that declining enrollment. You would have the impact of the loss of revenue hit your revenues in the local control funding formula the following year. You were always held in abeyance 1 year. One of the things that they did during COVID is they held our attendance flat from 1920 to 2021 so that you didn't feel that effect. Part of that was it was difficult to take attendance the way it was with the way children were being educated in 2021, as we all know. The other part of that is due to the decline. The other thing that happened was that as the state started to see everybody's attendance drop, they realized that it was a bigger problem. So they changed it again to a 3-year look back. And so you were given a 3-year average during that period. And so what it did is it impacted and gave healthier reserves. And so this is directly from School Services of California, which was the article name is listed at the bottom. And if anybody wants a copy of it, I'm happy to give it. But what it does is it shows the average reserves in the state by type of district. And so we have unified school districts, elementary districts, which is Ross Valley, obviously, and high school. And so at the end of last year, the average elementary was 25.55. And what was Ross Valley? 25.71. So in essence, we were right at the statewide average. I know it sounds high, but it was right around the average. And then the other part that's important to note is we actually declined over the previous year, where most districts were still going up. And then this other paragraph right below it is really from that article. And what they talk about is the need for higher reserves for various reasons: low COLA, declining enrollment, slowing state revenues, et cetera. And really what they're saying is an adequate reserve protects students, employees, and the public. And the reason it does that is because it allows districts time. So Chris doesn't have to come in and say, we need to cut $5 million right now. It gives us the ability to cut over a period of time, which is the reason everybody's here, so that we can start looking at ways to cut in the future with the least impact to students and staff. And so next steps, and I know we're just a little bit beyond it, I promise we'll only be a couple minutes more. We do have a meeting in 2 weeks. It'll be at the same time right here. And what we'll be talking about, we'll be providing additional information on the May revise. We'll start to look at those expenses that everybody was talking about. We've taken notes, so we'll start to dig into some of that information. And then other things that might come up. And some of that might be on our next agenda item. So I am, with that, going to close that agenda item. And we have one more item before we adjourn, which is future topics for budget advisory committee. And so this is really an open-ended item, which then just asks, is there anything in particular you guys want to talk about other than what we've heard? Is there something else that you guys would like to see or expect to see? Mr. Fetter.
Just how, if at all, the Marin grand jury report on expenses would affect this process.
That's a great point. Yeah, and for those that don't know what that is, it has to do with school supplies. So it could affect our supply budgets.
areas that you in the past have been cut, and then through process of discovery, that's an area that can't be cut. So that way we can see something, that like, okay, that was tried, it didn't work.
Yeah.
If there are
Okay.
specific.
Yeah, we can take a look at that as well. So,
Well, maybe sort of a breakdown of ways that school districts increase revenue. What are some other options?
Is there anything that you would recommend us reading or going to in the next 2 weeks to research that? Are there credible sites that you could think of that we should go? Oh, this is how Pasadena schools did a good job in X, Y, and Z. Right.
I will think about that one. That's a good one. It's hard for me because I have access to other sites. So.
But what do you think? I mean, like some homework for the next 2 weeks. Like, what should we be reading? What should we be Googling? Like, how can we get more educated, and how can we educate our peers?
Yeah, are there other school districts that have been in this or are in this that we can talk to? Like, what are their steps? And
There are.
have we talked to the county about this? I mean, it
Yeah.
looks like we have 2-3 more years before our reserves are depleted.
So there are other districts in the county that are experiencing issues, and so we can certainly start talking, and I know we have, and we have a new superintendent coming in who happens to be in one of those districts and has experienced it.
And I think in addition to the cuts, I could be misquoting the percent. I know that I think it was Nevada Unified, and they've been really focused on increasing attendance. I think they're at 96 or 97%, which I know is significantly more than us, and I think makes hundreds of thousands more dollars than we do. So what can we be doing at the sites, especially with the privilege of the parent community that we have? And I think that's where we can really come in to make sure kids are coming to school. Obviously not if they're sick, but I'm not taking vacations,
Yeah, I understand.
midweek, all week.
We are currently working on our attendance plan, and so there definitely are some steps that are included in that. And so I think we can talk about some of those next time, because we'll be a little further along in developing our plan by the next meeting.
But I think we really need to be thinking about the personal, because that's how we
Exactly.
reach the
That's
families, and
exactly
district
what it is.
plans don't always, no offense, don't always reach families.
specific
Yeah,
to
so like what can we be doing
It's on a
at
personal
our
level.
sites? Yeah.
It's on a personal level
Yeah.
down to
Okay.
an individual child. We're taking a look at the data. Who are the children who are most frequently absent? The sites have conducted interviews with children, with parents, to learn more about why they miss school. So all of it is the very granular, down to the student level, down, going up from there. But to learn exactly why, what we're seeing so far is that our parents just don't know that their child's absence impacts revenues. And so more education, needing to do about that, but still targeting, because even the information we put out, a lot of folks don't read the information. And so how do we ensure that it gets right into the family's hands of helping them understand? So it'll be a lot of personal outreach as well.
Chris, I want to be conscious of your time. And if somebody says, hey, I want to see line items for all the 1,500 categories, I want to see the whole spreadsheet of every check that went out for every 1,500. How much work is that for you? Is that like a day? Is that an hour? Is that 5 minutes?
So here's the thing, I'm not sure if I provided you all of that level of detail that it would be useful. Just because it would be a lot of data. Can I pull it? Yes, it can be done. We can download data.
How hard is it to task for you? Is it a lot, or is it not a lot?
I think it might be more, there are other ways to get to that level of data where you're not going down to the granular level of all of the checks.
Okay.
So I think what we do is we have our accounts broken up in other ways. And so we have, for example, we keep talking about the 5,800 object code. We might have 20 different objects that roll into the 5800. And so they might mean something else to us. And so we can give that level of data. And that would be the starting point, I think. If we were to download and provide all of the checks, I'm not sure that would be useful.
No, I don't want photocopies of checks.
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay, so I mean, what I would like to see for the committee is that we maybe choose and vote on 3 of these categories, whether or not it's 5,800 or something else, and then the committee asks for the next, I'll call it the onion, the next onion layer down. And then we can all vote and choose on those and say, look, these are the 3 we want to focus on and target. Because I think otherwise, I don't think any of us are going to be able to go through and say, yeah, travel and conferences, there it is, that's the one, without looking further down. And so that's what I would like to see the committee do next time on May 20th is vote on those 3 that we want to ask for.
Okay. We would have to agendize it because we would be actually taking a vote, but we can certainly take a look at something like that. In the meantime, what we'll be doing is starting to provide a little more granular level of data. On the 5800, I think you might look at it and go, okay, that's enough. We don't need everything else.
Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. This came up in the past couple of board meetings about the district benefit, the district admin benefit, the district level of the Me Too clause. Could we see who in the district, who at the district level, superintendent, your position, I know gets it, who's getting it and what % that is?
It's just the 2 of us.
It's just the 2 of you. Okay, so I have those numbers and I can share. Or you want to share with everyone? Beautiful.
And then is there an email? Can we all get an email exchange or one big email list so that we can email each other and say, hey, I want to put this on the committee vote, or I want to put this on here?
I think the better thing to do would be to go ahead and email Teresa with a CC to me on that if you've got a request on that.
Okay.
I'm not going to be able to do every single one of them, but we can certainly take a look at them. Again, let me start with the 5800. I think what we can do is start to break down, and I can start to talk about like the travel and conference. That seems to be one that's pretty big on it, people's radar.
5,500.
Yeah, I just don't want you to waste your time.
In 5,500.
I want
Those are the 3 big ones, I think.
so that you don't just waste your time. And so that, we should have to make a decision so you don't have to just sit there and be like, I wonder if it'd be interested in this.
Just a quick note before anybody sends an email to the whole group. Since this is a Brown Act board, we got to make sure that you're not talking in between public meetings with enough people to make a vote. So, I know in a board that's 5 people, you generally have a Brown Act buddy, so you can talk about things off topic and away from meetings of 2 people. So if you extrapolate that out for the number of people on this committee, I think that's a fair number of the size of the group. You should be talking about stuff in between meetings.
Yeah, and again, I think really what we want to do is just try and focus so that those emails come into Teresa and we can take a look at them, because some of them might be already going to be covered, and so it won't be an issue. So, and thank you, Mr. Pepper. You're right. Are there any others?
Is there any financial impact of the charter if we go into community funding, and how does that affect our budgets going out? Just as not something to answer now, but going forward.
Please, because we're already 11 minutes in.
That's actually effective based on our board history.
This email to research.
Noted.
We can talk about that. Okay, and we did go over a little bit, and so I apologize on that. But if I could get a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
I second.
Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.